Hi, Marleen, Monica, Patrick. I'm so happy to see you all and welcome to this panel discussion where we would take things a little bit more practical and try to answer questions in a way that people would know how to. And we are focusing on support structures. So the question is not firstly the engagement with children, but how to establish structures that will help them. So let me introduce our guests. Monica Woodhouse is a mother of 8 girls. 3 grew up in a womb and 5 in a heart. I assume all 8, there's lots of space in her heart. She and a team developed Give a Child a Family Trust Africa, an organization that works in 12 African countries with all aspects of child protection and family care. Presently, she's the executive director of GCF. She was also instrumental in establishing the South African National Child Rights Coalition with 140 civil society organizations. And the aim is to advance a stronger national child rights governance system. Monica, we could say much more about your amazing achievements and the work you do. Welcome and thank you for sharing this Friday with us. So when we hear Monica, we should think family. So family is the first support structure, and our questions will focus on that. Pastor Patrick, you've been well introduced, so I'm happy to meet you. I can tell our audience that you're standing in for a fellow brother who fell ill, and on short notice you were willing to join us. And it's so important to have men, and especially pastors, when we talk about children and support systems, because our experience is if the fathers and the pastors are not backing this, are not part of the support system, it is lonely and very challenging on the inside. So thank you, Pastor Patrick, for joining us. And then our third panelist, Marleen Mortin, born and raised in the Netherlands, currently lives in South Africa, and she lives here with her husband, Nick, and they work with children and those who work with children. And so as Monica, you heard family. With Pastor Patrick, you hear city and church. And with Monica, there's a global perspective. So you hear Europe, you hear Africa, and then also she's the Children's Ministry Director for the global work of Operation Mobilization. So Marleen, we're looking forward to hear something of that global perspective. The focus of her and the team is discipling children's workers to model to children what it means to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. So that's the global perspective, and we're looking forward. Welcome, dear sisters and brother. Thank you for sharing this time with us. So Monica, I'm going to start with you. You focus on family. That's clear. That's what you've done nationally, continentally, and even involved globally. So some people would say the family is an outdated concept. It's not working, and it's no longer the norm. Just help us, talk us through that challenge, please. And please, the others, keep your videos on, and we can mute while we listen to Monica. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being part of the symposium. It's been a rich afternoon already. We've had a lot of good information, but my question is, who is saying that the family model is not sufficient? And I would love these people to tell me of another way that is more effective than family, because the facts are very clear and research clearly link crime and societal problems with broken families and poor parental care. And isn't our Creator amazing? God himself is family, and we get to be part of that family, the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Son. Family was actually God's idea when we think about it. We were meant to be brought up, we were meant to be brought up in secure and safe families. Unfortunately, because of the evil in the world and the way it's going, fathers and mothers have not been good representatives to their children. So cycles of dishonor and family breakdowns continued from generation to generation. And unless captured and cycles broken, children are doomed for despair. On the converse, we know about families that have followed godly principles. There's great development in their cycle, and the children land up standing on the shoulders of their parents to grow and become useful in society, their community, and even the world. The family unit plays a crucial role in the child's development and well-being. While it is true that there may be differing opinions and diverse family structures in society, the fundamental importance of a nurturing and supportive environment remains a common thread. Families can take various forms. We know that there's caregivers, single-parent households, blended families, close-knit communities. In Africa, we have grandparents that act as a supportive network. Ultimately, the effectiveness of the family model depends on the commitment, love, and positive influence provided by the individuals involved in raising children, rather than a specific predetermined structure. This is where adoptive parents, foster parents, and safety parents play a huge role in accommodating orphans and children in need of love and care. And I want to put out the challenge that if every Christian family in South Africa took just one child needing care, we would not have an orphan or abandonment crisis in South Africa. And we at Give a Child a Family Africa have, in more than 30 years, been empowering, strengthening families in an African context to do what they need to do. Sometimes it's a nudge, a listening ear, or attend courses to understand one's role better as a mother, father, sibling, and child. We really want to break these cycles of despair and prevent family breakdowns even further. I've come to discover as I've worked with these children is that children need a very deep sense of belonging. And this is what we've seen in the 30 years we've been working with abused and abandoned children. There's still no one better than mommy. There's still no one better than my mother, no matter how evil she may have been. So we at Give a Child a Family try and help rebuild what was broken. And if that's not possible, then we have a beautiful foster families that take their role very seriously in caring for children that are not their own. But our call has become even greater, and that is the prevention. That is the first call that is needed to empower families to not get to a broken place. Much work has to be done to help families. Removing children is not the answer. We've seen that over these years as we've worked. And every child, we've heard about the Bill of Rights, and every child has the right to a family, even in South Africa. And we have seen the first-hand children's trajectory of life transformed by the love of Jesus the love of Jesus Christ in their hearts, as they have seen the love being given to them from these Christian families. There's a deep sense of belonging. This is restored, just like we are as adopted into the family of Christ. My mantra is that it all starts in the families, the good and the bad. And my challenge today is let's all stand together and let God's love flow through us, so we can help these children from an overflow of love in my own hearts. A child, and I heard Dr. Nativity actually say this already. This is my absolute favorite. A child needs only one adult who's crazy about them. And so at GCF, we provide training for these parents, for the churches, for organizations in parenting, psychological first aid, justice for children, child protection, protective behaviors, and safeguarding. And we also do reunification services, foster care training, and temporary safe care training. And we are all about children should be in secure families, because that's really all that we really stand for and believe.
Thank you so much, Monica. So what I take out of your rich sharing is that for Christians, family is non-negotiable. That's God's design. That's the platform. That's the basis. You're not saying that family is without its challenges, but you say there are intelligent ways to work through our challenges, and we can make family work. And thank you for just opening that up to us. Pastor Patrick, being a pastor's kid myself and having worked with pastors a while, I'm going to give you a statement based on my experience, and you don't know where this is going, but my statement is that it seems to me that pastors are not naturally or usually pro-children. So I need to explain it, and then you can critique this. My experience is that God needs to almost take us through another conversion as pastors. We are so filled with theology and responsibility and management, all the tasks, that very few pastors understand God's heart for children until God opens their eyes and something happens. So you are welcome to take issue with me and give a different one, but I invite you to speak to this statement of mine. Was that your experience? And how, if not, how do you feel about it?
I think I would agree with your statement to a large extent. My experience, especially with pastors that have not been exposed to a good training on God's heart for children, they don't have it. And for many of them, it's not because they have a bad heart towards children, it's mostly because they do not know any better. No one has shown them, no one has taught them that. And when you look at many of our theological institutions, the training that's offered for church leaders doesn't focus on children. It's offered for other ministers. That's the primary target. When you think of even the courses that our pastors do, the course on children is an elective course. It is never a part of the key courses that they have to cover. I think of many of the leaders that once you talk to them and go through scripture with them, they come to appreciate and to see God within a new light. So there's room for us to think through how do we help church leaders understand the value God places on children, and how can we be more intentional about that. Otherwise, most times they won't do and they won't appreciate what they do not know as being of importance to God. The other thing about it is the modern church today has a lot of pressures to accomplish so many things, and because the adults are the ones that do most of the giving and volunteering, you could focus on them and ignore the children. But slowly by slowly in Uganda and in churches like the one that I pastor, we've seen the value that children add to the church. So, for instance, I was a child when this church was opened, and 30 years later, joining the church, I'm the senior pastor of the church. Something was done right while I was a child for them to entrust me. And I'm the senior pastor in a church where those who taught me are still members of the church. So I agree with you, and there's work for us to do to help pastors see what God says about children and to appreciate it as well.
Thank you, Pastor Patrick. I wish we could quote your response. We've established a few things. You agree with me that this doesn't come naturally for pastors, and we can go back. Often it's not central in their training. So that's what you say. If we invite pastors into some form of experience, if we guide them and lead them to see that this is actually what Jesus wants us to do, and if we open the way for mothers, for teachers, for social workers, for psychologists, then it can thrive from the church. So thank you so much. We would follow on that in the next round. Marleen, now we go global. You're part of a very impressive mission organization, and you head up the children focus. So just talk to us about the connection between children and mission, because obviously this is your passion.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, and it's actually still quite a new ministry. OM is been there for years, and the heart of OM is to make vibrant communities of Jesus followers, especially among the least reached. And a few years ago, I started thinking about the vision, and if we want to see a vibrant community, we need to include children. And if we look at the world and specifically the statistics of the world and the population of the world, we see that specifically in those least reached areas, there's many children. And so often we go there as missionaries and we start church plant initiatives, but we forget about the children. And so I became the voice for children's ministry in OM. And thankfully there were many other voices, but now we've becoming, actually one voice working together. And what we want to see is that these vibrant communities are welcoming and discipling children. And So I started to talk about how can we do this strategically, what are ways to do this, and I already heard it a little bit from Patrick and also from Monica, that training is so vital. Very often when we go into a community, we encounter people and they don't always know how to work with the kids. They might have a passion for the children but don't know what to do with children, or they might, as Patrick shared, might not see the importance of children. They might want to serve God but not see what is God's heart for children. And so we started doing this first in Africa by training people in Africa. And during the time of COVID, we actually went online, and we saw that the need was way bigger than we thought. And many people all around the world were doing this training that we organized. And in the training, we talked about God's heart for children. How do you disciple children? For example, once they come to faith, what do you do? How do you help them to grow? How do you help them deal with the pressures that they will face in their communities? But also, how do you advocate for children and be a voice for them? I think in the previous session, I saw the passion that Pastor Patrick has for advocating for children. And once I started teaching people in OM to advocate for children as well, things started to change. And it was really awesome to see some hearts changed. And one of the people that we trained in Central Asia, or actually two, it was a church planter and it was a children's worker. They started to train locally. And in 1 year, they've trained 250 local people, local pastors, local church planters, local children's workers, and it has changed so much. And one of the pastors that attended this training, he said, you need to come and tell my whole church how important children are. And that keeps me going, because I can't just go everywhere in the world, but I can empower people to empower people to empower people. And that's what missions is. It's multiplying. And we see children as active agents, active participants in God's mission. And they bring change in the community once we empower them as well. And I can share one more short example. We had a lady in Malawi who was working in the Yao community. And she was sharing with the older girls in the community how to make good choices in life. And the girls started to change. But one of the leaders in the community said that his girls were not allowed to come anymore because they started to love Jesus. And eventually, they were not allowed to come. But a few months later, he came back and he said to the lady, he said, please, can they come back? They start to make all these bad choices. They start to sleep around. They start to do all these things. You at least teach them the right way. I rather have them follow Jesus than follow the wrong way. And he and the whole village changed because of what God was doing in the hearts of these children. And so, lives are transformed because we help the leaders to disciple the children. And so the parents are also transformed.
Thank you so much, Marleen. What we take out of this, children are important to God, and we need to broaden our perspective, not only the children at home or at church, but also cross-culturally or internationally. Remember the children, they are important to God. They are responsive. Our eyes need to be open to what God wants us to accomplish. So thank you for that perspective. Monica, we're back to family. Can you give us some practical guidelines or just steps as you help the staff members or people who look up to you for leadership to do better with their families? So just, we assume that for many people, family is a challenge and you want your workers to succeed there. So the how to, do you have some practical steps that can help your audience today to also, when they think of their co-workers, to try to follow some of your advice in practice. Thank you, Monica.
Mrs. Woodhouse,
Still
sorry
muted,
to
sorry.
interrupt you. Sorry, Dr. Malherbe. Could you join audio the way you did earlier? I see that you had dropped out, but click on the little white arrow and choose your device. Seems that Mrs. Woodhouse can't hear me either. Could you give us a thumbs up if you can hear me? If you click on the little white arrow on the headphones or the microphone that is underneath the presentation, you will get to join audio and choose your device. Alternatively, Dr. Malherbe, if you have a question for one of the other speakers,
Yeah, we
perhaps
would
Mrs. Wood
proceed.
even
Thank you,
join us.
Michelle. Thank you so much for your assistance. Pastor Patrick, the second bit of practical advice that I've learned is that pastors learn best from pastors. And you could, again, give your view there. But then also, pastors are not so much impressed by new theories and all sorts of articles and books. They want to see the practical difference in your church. So if you agree, how does this work out in Kampala? What is the secret of pastors encouraging, supporting other pastors to really prioritize the best interests of the children of the city?
Thank you, Johannes. I do agree with you. My experience has been that pastors learn best from other pastors, and part of why I think that is a good strategy is because they understand each other's language, they understand the challenges that the others are facing, and you're able to even refer to examples from within your local church. And here in Kampala, so I do the church mobilization and work for Crane Network, and got into this role a few years ago. And most of the pastors that I do meet with are more experienced than I am. They've been pastoring, some of them for as long as I've been alive. And when I approach them, I don't approach them from a point of I know it all and this is how you ought to be doing it. But it's kind of like there's mutual learning that is taking place, and I'm telling them, here is what best practices are telling us. Here are examples of this at work within the church. What do you think? Is this something that can be adjusted to work within your context? The other thing that I think we need to be thinking about as we are trying to empower church leaders is how do we contextualize the messages that we have towards church context. So earlier on, we talked about safeguarding, um, we talked about child protection. And as we encourage, say, churches to have policies and to think through how they support children, we need someone who's thinking, how do churches work? What do they already have in place? What are the gaps that need to be filled? So when you come to our trainings, you'll notice that we are teaching the same thing to social workers, but the approach is different, the language is a little different, but at the very core, it is the same thing that is happening there. So within Kampala, we've had to adjust our resources, adjust our trainings to suit church leaders such that it works for them. And since churches work a lot with volunteers, this was also mentioned earlier on in the conference, we have to think through how do they engage and get the best out of the volunteers that they have, because that is going to be different from an organization that has workers that are paid. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Patrick. But I think just to emphasize to our audience, this is very important. No matter what your specialization in your work with children, pastors would make excellent allies in your work. So it's worthwhile praying and building those relationships. And then, as Pastor Patrick said, he is then best equipped to reach out to other pastors, because this is just, we learn from people who've mastered what we're busy with. So it's just a simple fact of life. And pastors are not unwilling, but they often not trained for this, and they don't have good models. And as Pastor Patrick explained, once that lives in his heart and his church, it's very easy for him to challenge and to reach out and to build a network in Kampala. Thank you for that, Pastor Patrick. Monica, I just want to check if you heard my question, but I'll just repeat it. If you can maybe give us practical steps. I assume we have a lot of leaders in the audience. How do you help your staff to do better in their families so that it can benefit your ministry? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Our bandwidth dropped there. But yeah, as a professional, one can't always bring home and family issues to work. But I think, and they do clash, and there is a spillover. And so as an organization or a church we need to really be even caring for our own families within our own environment and our own communities. So we need to create an environment where people feel comfortable, there's openness and empathetic communication, allowing time for dealing with issues, offering resources and information where to go in the event of some family issues, navigating that, recommending books, articles, support groups, or professional services like therapists and counselors and in the church or in the church environment or wherever. We need to be flexible. I think that is something that we have to look at in these days. The mental health issues amongst families and children and is extreme, and it can be very emotionally draining and time consuming. But we need to consider things like flexi hours or remote work, or ensuring that leave is taken properly. Sometimes we drive our workers and people and families to just perform, and I think that often is a really a big issue for families as well. And really being able to make sure that leave is taken, time with the family is spent, even on a daily basis, just spending 10, 15, 20 minutes a day with your children and teaching that connectedness, how important that connectedness is. And at our organization, at Give a Child a Family, we have cultivated a supportive work culture where family takes high priority. We allow the family parents to go to sports days and to go to certain things and prize givings and things like that, because we see that as a high priority, and that family do take first preference in certain things. And we also do employment assistance programs. And to the issue about children, families not being all together, of course, all families have flaws. I think we all, in one way or another. But what we've come to understand is that there are levels of dysfunctionality and levels of risk and levels. And, when you're working with people and counseling and working in these environments, we don't have to have all the answers and be perfect. We don't have to strive to be perfect or look like we're being perfect. The important thing about challenges in our own family is being aware of one's own issues and dealing with them and not disregarding them or pretending they don't exist. I think that is the hardest thing is to just pretend that no, everything's fine, but being truthful and honest to ourselves, making people realize that we are also not perfect in any way. But we need to be willing to listen, be a listening ear, shoulder to cry on, helping people to deal with their pain, and then help them also just to shovel those matters to Jesus, because Jesus is really the only one that can help them deal with all their cares and concerns. And it might seem oversimplified, but I really believe that when I have seen that when Jesus gets to be real in our lives, we really want to even make family work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. And I think if we take this out of our meeting, that our co-workers, no matter what our ministry or our organization would be about, they also have families. And you've sensitized us to those needs, and you gave us practical examples how to signal to our staff the importance of family. And maybe, I mean, as you raised your own children, you just share some of your challenges and your special achievements, and in that way we are made aware of the importance of family. And thank you for this example of allowing special times and celebrations for family members. I think that also signals a high value of family even in your staff's lives. Marleen, this would be the last of our set questions, and then we would go to a round of open questions from our participants, from our audience. So the moderator would soon open up. You can start typing, and as before, please indicate who you would prefer the question to be addressed to. Marleen, the concept of God's heart for missions, or God's heart for the nations, do you think it's something children can understand? And is it something, how does this feature in your ministry? How do you help children and those with them to develop God's heart for the nations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is something that is really much on my heart. I think especially because I was called as a child. I was still quite young when God called me into missions, and already specifically to work with children. But I've also done some research, and I'm still excited to do more research in this. One thing that I've learned is that the worldview of a child is formed in the early ages, or the primary worldview. Dr. Barna has done some research and has said that it's between 15 months and about 13 years old that primary worldview is formed. And I was thinking, what if missions would be a part of that worldview? And of course, we want a biblical worldview, but missions is in the biblical worldview. So it would be awesome if that would be part of it. And so as a team, we started to think, like, what would be great ways to share that passion for the nations that God has, to share it with children. And we first started to pray ourselves. Our organization started through an older lady that started to pray for youth in the school next to her. And George Brewer was one of the students attending that school, and he became the founder of our organization. So we started to pray that God would stir in the hearts of children towards the nations. We also looked at, like, what does OM already do for mobilizing people into missions, but also what do other organizations do? And we started to collect materials that were already there, but also to develop materials and use these things to create an excitement into children and an awareness about the nations, that there is people all around the world and that people need Jesus. And but also, what do the people believe in at the moment? How does God see people? How does he value them? And and how can you pray for them? So one of the things, we developed some training on how to talk with children about different faiths, how to talk with children about the nations, how to teach them about these things, but also how to pray with them. And it's part of that training that we do. And one of the people that we trained, he's from Zambia, and he started to see, wow, I need to start mobilizing the children in my country. And he's then invited some children to come for a missions event. They actually paid for it. And the first time he prepared for 200 kids, but 400 came. And it's just exploding. At the moment, it's events of more than 1,000 kids. And the Sunday school teachers are like, we need to talk about this with the children. We need to pray more for the nations. And one of the children, it was a young girl, she started to cry. And they asked, why are you crying? And she said, because I never thought that people could live without Jesus, and I want them to know about Jesus too. And I think this is one of the things we have seen, that children can grasp that they have the love of Jesus, and that some people don't have that, and that they also should hear the good news of Jesus. And we also started to develop materials for families, because we also feel it's not just big events, but it's also something that a family needs to reflect and show. And so we've developed some materials for families, and we also point out materials that are there in other organizations, because we don't have to develop everything. Via Families, for example, is before it was Weave Family. They have amazing materials on praying with children for the nations. That is what we do to connect children with the heart of missions. And I hope one day we will see more people connect with the people in their own neighborhood, and also with people further away.
Thank you so much, Marleen, and all the sharing your excitement for God's heart for the nations and your excitement with positive experience with children that inspires us. Thank you so much. Pastor Patrick, what encourages you? You are privileged to minister. To me, Kampala is in the heart of Africa. If you draw north, south, and east, west, you land where they intersect. That's the cross, that's Kampala. So what have you learned? What excites you about the work with children and the support structures in Kampala? Anything that you want to share with us?
Yeah, thank you. There are a few things that excite me about the work with children in Kampala. And I think, first of all, is my own personal experience that from a young age, there have been people working with me and helping me love God and see His mission. So I know the value of starting to work with a child and working with them their whole life. But the other thing that excites me is how our population looks like within Uganda and even within East Africa, that majority of our population are young children. And if we're thinking about changing our country, we're thinking about having a better nation, then you have to work with the children because in a few years' time, they're going to be the ones making the policies, they're going to be the ones changing society and moving things around. The other thing that does excite me is the willingness by our government to actually put in place policies that are favorable to children and that encourage the family setting. So you kind of have this support from the government that is out there, and it kind of paves way when you're having discussions with different people. Then, of course, all this is undergirded by God's heart for children that we can't say too little about, but I believe everyone on this call now kind of understands.
Thank you so much. From the positivity in Kampala, Monica, can we share with you, invite you to respond to something more worrying, and that's teenage pregnancies. And it seems like COVID has been a season where this is even a bigger problem. So from a family perspective, what is your advice? Where do we start? The girl might be 14, 15 years old. What does it mean to family, and what is your practical advice to us today?
Yeah, Johannes, I think that we as Christians don't talk about the sex, and we don't talk about sexuality in our families because we leave that often to the schools or to the friends and all that. And I think that is something that we really work very hard at, helping families to really know what to say, when to say it, how to say it, and how to speak to children about this. Because I think the one aspect that I mean, the whole thing with teenage pregnancies is actually not what we've come to understand is 80% of it is done by teachers in schools as well. So there is a big problem in our country with regards to this, and that it's not it's not peer to peer, but that it's mainly, the research is showing us that it's mainly done by adults, older adults, and usually teachers or principals. And so, there are programs like protective behavior, the safeguarding that Tony Lawrence spoke about, but even things like protective behaviors, teaching children and parents how to protect themselves, how to understand the language of safety. What is the language of safety, and how do we actually help young children from a young age? We run these programs from 3-year-olds, from early childhood development into teenage to up to teenagers, because we've got to, before we used to only talk to children about sex when they was like 13, 14, 15. Now you've got to start somewhere where 3, 4 already, because you've got to actually, help children to know what to do, what is safe, what is not safe, when do you feel safe, what do you do when you don't feel safe, and those things. So it's something that we as family and church have to really take on board, seriously take on board, that we have to be talking and dealing with this on a very serious level with our children. And it doesn't have to be awkward. It can be done within your devotions. It can be done. There's very many ways, and we teach families how to do it as well, and in understanding about all these matters. They are not to be hush hush. They're not to be things that you just only talk about when a child gets into teenage or before teenage years or something. It is something we have to deal with from very young already, because perpetrators, pedophiles, they start already when the youngest child that we've had that's been abused, sexually abused, was a 2-month-old baby. Okay, now that baby can't protect itself, but that is how young it's going. It's really, there are horrific statistics out there about that. So we need to be protecting our children.
Thank you, Monica, and sorry for inviting you into something that we all know is a sad reality, but thanks for the advice. Can I ask our panelists, if you feel free to do so, to share your email addresses in the chat box if people want to follow up with you on some of the specifics? I think that would be appreciated. Marleen, the question of the ethics of sharing faith with an underage person. So just take us into that challenge. Obviously, you've learned a lot and you know how to deal with it sensitively. So may I put this question this way? Is it allowed to share faith with a child when the parent is not present or didn't give permission? How do you deal with children's rights in sharing the gospel?
Thank you for that question. And it's something that I'm discussing a lot with people around me. I think it's not often enough discussed in the missions world, because we are very passionate about our mission, and that includes sharing the gospel with children. But I always ask people the question as well: how would you feel if someone of another faith comes and tries to convert your child? And then they start thinking and being like, okay, I'm not 100% sure how I would feel about that. And when I spoke about this within the international team, so with different people from different countries, one of the ladies shared with me, she's working in a Muslim country, and she shared with me that obviously she can't in the country where she's working, but she also shared that if she would, which in the past she started sharing just with the kids, they would come to faith, but in their teenage years they would walk away because their family said, now it's done with this nonsense. Now you're you should be making your family proud by following the teachings of Islam. But she learned that when she comes and shares with the whole family, that when a family comes to faith, the children will also follow. And sometimes the children serve as an example. So she started, for example, doing a family discovery Bible study in a Muslim setting. And the children started to be obedient to everything that the Bible said. And the father was like, hey, they do what they've learned last week, so I should start doing this too. Otherwise, they are ahead of me. And it was so beautiful to hear this, even though the family hasn't made a decision yet as on if they're going to follow Christ, but they're busy studying the Bible and trying to do what the Bible says. And so it's great to see that works. And I just I'm excited to see it doing it that way, and I'm encouraging people to really think about how can you incorporate the parents and go back, as what Monica said, to where actually God intended faith to also grow and children to grow up is the family. So we shouldn't take kids away from the family when we share the gospel with them and do it secretly, but doing it with the parents. I have one more short example in that situation, which is also in a North African country where a Muslim background believer, he started to work in the community with the children, and the parents were very opposed to it. And he then shared that he said to the parents, "I'm not sharing anything with the children that you cannot hear, so please come and join us." And he included the parents in even the whole program, and they're starting to help him now while they're hearing the gospel too. So yeah, incorporate parents, include parents, don't push them away, because that's where spiritual abuse can start taking place.
Thank you so much. Beautiful, practical, clear advice to remind us to respect the parents even when we work cross-culturally or cross-religiously. Monica, 3 comments. Catherine says there might be something like teaching your children hand signs, signals that can tell others, I don't feel comfortable. Maybe if you want to pick up on that. Candida wants to remind you that it's her birthday today, and she, no, I'm just teasing. Happy birthday, Candida. But you asked for contact details. You have it just above yours. If you want more, just ask. But I think Monica would be happy to share with you. Candida leads our counseling section at SATS, and so they are developing material, and that would maybe a very fruitful exchange between the two of you. I want to invite you to Cornelia's question. I guess you have looked at it, so I'm not going to read all of it. Cornelia just asks perspective on what does adoption do to the child, or what is a child perspective on adoption. Monica, you're welcome to respond as you see fit.
Okay. I know that these issues are dealt with very badly in the country, or generally, or the children's perspective is not taken into consideration. It's with regards to the mindset about adoption, being an empathetic, child-centered approach in adoption and fostering. And in our case, we're very, very particular about that. Even children with disability, moving them from one place to another, you're actually moving them from a familiar place to an unfamiliar place, and there's a process that has to take place, and that we are very strict in doing that in our own organization. There's a process. There's what we call an introduction process that has to be followed very strictly. It's not just like, okay, so I can be a foster parent today. We have a recruitment. We recruit. We work very hard. It takes about 6 to 9 months to do the whole process, to make sure that children aren't just taken, oh, that child is cute, I'll take that child home, for example, or whatever it might be, and even with regards to that. So unfortunately, there are systems in the country or in Africa and maybe globally where children are not considered in these things, and that's really dangerous, and it does really traumatize a child. So it has to be done effectively and done with empathy for them. Even removing children, they come to us even at in temporary safe care parents. They come with temporary safe care parents having been taken away and not being told why they were removed. And my theory is we should never be removing children without first. We should actually remove the perpetrator. In my view, I know that that's quite a horrific view, but we shouldn't be removing children. We should be removing a perpetrator, put them on a farm, let them make money for the family, and then keep the family intact that way. But And then, so I think, I don't know if that's answered the question, but I think that we have to be very, very empathetic in the way that we deal with movement of children. They are not pawns on a board. They really are people who will be affected, severely affected by that.
Thank you so much. I think this should be it for today for our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much, Marleen, Monica, and Patrick. Thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and just enriching our whole process today. SATS and the audience appreciate this, and may God bless your work. We will also include you in our final prayer at the end. Thank you so much.